For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Lucas. I'm the supervisor of social studies and family and consumer science. But tonight I'm just going to share our social studies department and some of the good work that they've been doing. So I wanted to just share with you a little bit about what our offerings are. We have a lot of coursework that students can choose from. We have 23 courses over and above our required classes that students need to take. So there they are. We have great AP courses. We have 3 dual enrollment courses, and then we have our electives. There's our required course progression. So, and this is a typical course progression. We're pretty flexible with the idea that if a student comes in and they need to take a course because they missed a year, if they were from somewhere else, from another district, we have students that may take a course if they're freshmen. They may take a US 2 course because they've already taken their other courses. So US 1 is typically in the freshman year. Sophomore year, we now have an AP US History course that's 10 credits. This is our 3rd year. Our first year was 1920 when the pandemic first hit. So that was a great experiment. But the students meet every day for AP US History, and they cover that just in their sophomore year. So when they're recommended for that, or they choose to take it, they take whatever they want to their freshman year. They may take an elective in the social studies, they may take an elective somewhere else, and then they come in their sophomore year and they take a 10-credit course with us. The junior level, which is the last level of our required courses, you can either take a global studies class or you can take AP World. And those are the 3 courses that are required for graduation in New Jersey that we have. In our social studies department a few years ago, we started de-leveling. We do not have an honors level course. We don't have requirements to get into courses. If a student wants to try an AP course, they're perfectly capable of doing that. They really don't specifically need a teacher recommendation. So if they want to try and challenge themselves, we welcome them in our department. I wanted to share with you a little bit about my department, our department. And this doesn't even come close to explaining what type of department and what type of staff we have. But I just thought it was a good statistic for you to see. 63% of our staff, I have a staff of 27, they have their master's degree. I have 11% of my staff that are in the middle of their doctoral work, and 14.8% of our staff have their PhD or their doctorate. They range from, I think you saw Mr. Butler, Dr. Butler, not too long ago. I have something in here that I'm sharing with you from him. He just recently got his doctorate in Irish Studies. We have folks that have advanced degrees in Holocaust studies, in educational administration. It runs the gamut. You can ask Mr. Brandt over there. The social studies department is very involved in student life. We have teachers who are advising all types of clubs, and every time you turn around, there's a social studies teacher somewhere. So they're here at a lot of board member meetings to support our students. And they're a super involved and super dedicated department, and I'm humbled to be able to work with them. The work that they've done has been incredible. So I want to share a little bit about our teams and our PLC structure. So this is one of 4 teams. I couldn't fit them all in one slide without making it too small for everyone to see. So I'm not sure if you realize, but in social studies, you have to have a special certification to teach psychology. You have to have a minor. You can't just have a standard social studies cert. So finding psychology teachers is like finding a needle in a haystack when you need them, and we have 3. We have a very robust psychology program. It's one of the most highly enrolled elective series in the school. So our psychology team is Mr. Pomerico, Mr. Bellotti, and Ms. Olbrich. And here are the rest of our PLC teams. So like I said, I have a large department. I have a global studies team, a US 2 team, and a US 1 team. Now, also within this PLC structure, because of the amount of classes we have, teachers will double up on professional learning community or teams that they sit on. These are the groups that meet on a regular basis. Teachers tend to be members of multiple PLC teams, and occasionally this can be very overwhelming for staff. We meet every Tuesday. But what this does is the idea that staff members are on multiple PLCs is it's the germination of a lot of ideas in our department. So when you have 12 or 15 staff members who are super involved and super dedicated to their craft, You get a lot of really good ideas. It's like our proving grounds or our sandbox. And what that does is it helps us share ideas with our major PLCs. It tweaks assessments. It does a lot of the work that you don't see when you go into a classroom, a lot of those behind-the-scenes work. The bulk of that work supports classroom instruction, and it takes place here. But then also in this area is where we get a lot of innovation with learning strategies, activities, and assessment practices. And when we moved into the pandemic and moved into remote teaching, this is where a lot of our ideas for how we were going to change instruction to be fully remote or hybrid came from these groups. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of data. So this is AP data from 2021. We obviously don't have our data for this year. But what this actually is this bar graph compares the Hunterdon Central percentage of students who scored a 3 or higher to New Jersey students who scored a 3 or higher. In College Board, a 3 is passing. So I thought that this would be good data for you to take a look at. Our students meet or exceed the New Jersey percentage in all but 2 of these courses. I'll talk about those in a minute. What I would like you to take a specific look at is if you look at micro and macro there. Macro, the orange is us and blue is New Jersey. So we exceed in both of those, and what's I think very special about this is that AP Economics is a 5-credit course, and our teacher teaches both AP Micro and AP Macro within that period. So they're actually studying for both of those exams and taking both of those exams and meeting our expectations and in most cases beating them. So AP US and AP Euro are the courses where we're not quite meeting those expectations. Like I said previously, AP US, this is a new course for us. We have not had a full year of regular instruction yet. This is our first year of that. So it's been a very bumpy road trying to change instruction to fit our students. So we're hoping that with this year, we're in the middle of AP study groups now, that will be a little bit better. AP Euro is one of the hardest AP tests to take. It's got a very low pass rate, which means a lot of times what College Board will do is they will rank your courses based on pass rate, and AP Euro has a very in-depth type of historical context that you need to know, and the exam is a little bit more difficult. So that's one where we have a little bit of work to do. Linkit. So we started experimenting with Linkit, which is our data management system, and this was a difficult task for us because social studies right now we're not. So when I went to high school, and I might be dating myself a little bit, it was a lot of rote memorization, right? It was a lot of names, dates, events, and that's not how our department functions. So we're really skill-based. So what we use is we use our skills to drive the content. So students don't really memorize much in the department these days. So to create stimulus-based types of questions for an assessment was not an easy task for the department. So it took us a little bit of time. We experimented last year, and we came up with some pretty good assessments for US1 and US2 that we're working on, our students are taking now and that we're tweaking. So the reason why we're doing Linkit is for those four data points right there. Number 1 and number 2 is really what we're focusing on now. So when you look at some of these Linkit assessments, and I'm going to share some samples with you, we're looking for our standards. That's the NJSLS for social studies. More importantly, we're looking at historical thinking skills, how well students can decode or source a text, if they understand advanced nuances in what the speaker or what the artist is conveying. New Jersey state mandates, which I will also go over because we do have quite a bit of quite a lot of those, and companion standards, which would be English and math and science. And we also analyze the progression of student growth. So I'm going to share a few. I'm going to share a US1 with you, so you can take a good look at this. Here we go. All right. So this is what a student would take a look at in Linkit. And in social studies, we have 4 distinct units. So it's almost like marking peers. We have Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4. This is our Unit 3 Linkit assessment, and this is the reform era. for US 1. So obviously women's suffrage is involved in that time period. So what the student would do is they would read a document about women's suffrage, and then they would answer some stimulus-based response questions. So they need to take a look at what the thesis would be of that document. So what is the main idea? They would have to take a look at what was the amendment that was being spoken about? So the questions aren't really that you can't memorize these. You have to understand how to read the text and how to apply your historical thinking skills to understand what's being said here. And let's see, I have it up here. Oh, okay. And here is a US 2 linkage, and this is a reform move. This is a Unit 3 as well. And you'll see that once you get to the sophomore level, the documents get a little bit more complex, and also students are looking at not just one document, but two. So this is the Civil Rights Movement. This would be Unit 3, and this is actually a letter from a Birmingham jail, which is one of the seminal documents of this time period. So, and then you also have a photo of a protest during this time period. So the students have to actually take a look at these, decode, figure out what the thesis is for document A, document B, and then synthesize both of these documents to answer the following questions on document A, document B, and then both, and then the actual significance of those. So what we're looking for here is we're looking at students' ability to apply historical thinking skills to these documents. And we have specific processes that students use to do this. All right. These are some of our learning gaps, which obviously we have some pretty significant learning gaps, especially post-COVID or post-pandemic. So through our linkage assessments, we took a look at those stimulus-based questions, and up to this date, historical context and purpose are the areas where students seem to be having a little bit of trouble. Now, those are some abstract types of skills that I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we also have our PLC unit assessments. So there are 4 major summative assessments that we use to track student growth. And some of the strategies and some of the skills that they're assessed on are inquiry, research, writing, and presentation or discussion. And what we're seeing there is that students are struggling with some abstract thought, with making inferences, and with content-specific reading and writing. Now, during remote and hybrid learning, we found out that a lot of the middle school students were not reading much or not writing much, right? Because when you were online, there wasn't a lot of that going on. Everyone was trying to keep their heads above water. And the actual content reading for social studies is very difficult to do when a student is home and you're on Google Classroom and you're on remote with them. So this is where our students are struggling, our freshman students specifically. So some of the things that we are working on to accelerate our kids and give them the support where they need are, we're looking at some of the skills that deal with some of the weaknesses, and we're breaking them up into smaller pieces, and we are implementing them into instruction on a more regular basis. I can show you an example of that in a minute. Okay. So our PLC teams have really taken a look at some of the weaknesses, and they've discussed some of these gaps, particularly in US 1 and US 2. So we're currently right now at the share, reflect, and evaluate stages of our cycle. We've broken down some of the larger skills. We're giving regular practice with the students, and some of the strategies, especially some of the work that we're doing with content and with participant identity, has helped students make more connections with purpose and abstract thinking. Okay, and here's where I'll talk a little bit about some of those skills. So here's some of our department practices and skills. So some of the practices that our teachers regularly use with our students are listed here in our little circles: discussion and simulation. Some of you have had students that have gone through our department, have heard of like the Enlightenment Salon, where students will actually have a scored discussion in the classroom where they take on the persona of someone, they have to do research, and they actually have conversation with other folks that are other reformers of that time period. Historical writing, inquiry, identity work, choice boards, and Hipaa. Choice boards came out of the pandemic, and it's become a practice that we found has been very helpful for students when it comes to student choice. So for example, if you're looking at the civil rights movement in US 2, students may have a specific document that they would look at, and they would have the choice to do certain activities. They would get to pick whichever one they wanted, and they would all satisfy the requirement that they needed. Hipaa is the cornerstone of our coursework, and I'm going to share that with you now, and then I'll get to the skills. So this is my Hipaa cheat sheet when I go into classrooms and take a look at what's going on. So this is to help examine primary and secondary sources, and this is what we do in the classroom. We are not textbook-based. We use primary and secondary sources more to get our information from and to glean what history is about. So students will take a look at a document and they'll apply what we call Hipaa. So Hipaa is a historical thinking strategy, historical context, the date of the document, what was going on when the author wrote it, what was going on in total, not just what was going on at that particular place, but what was going on in the world or in the country around them when that document was written or that political cartoon was drawn. Some of the higher level thinking skills in historical context is what larger events shape the writing of this document. We all know that when we write something or create something, there's something going on that's making us do that. So we encourage our students to figure those things out. Intended audience, this is one of those abstract thoughts, those abstract thinking skills that some of the students have been struggling with. What type of document was it? Was it intended for the public, or was it intended for someone's spouse? Was it intended for a church group? Who is speaking to whom? How does the audience shape or inform the content of the document? Me talking about the department here, right, in front of board members in public, it would be very different if I was talking to my own department members who know a lot of this already. My presentation would be very different. So that's intended audience. Purpose. Why did the author create this? How does the author's purpose shape or inform the content of the document? So a lot of this now gets up into that abstract type of thought process. What point is the author attempting to convey? And then at the end, author's perspective. And this is where you come into bias, right? Because everyone who writes something has bias. That's part of human nature. So identify the author and what's the significance of the author's point of view. What's going on with that author that made them create that, write that? How does the author's background, their race, their gender, their social class, how does that impact their writing? And what tone do you anticipate the author to use? And what broad historical themes influence the author in creating the document? So this is our Hipaa practice. And this is what students do as freshmen, as sophomores, and as juniors, and in a lot of our electives. This is a simple way for students to understand how to digest difficult text. And this is a skill that they can take with them, because when they are reading something, when they're adults and they need to understand the point of view or when this was written or why it was written, it gives students a good base of understanding what they're actually reading. Inquiry, this is Dr. Butler's. So this is the inquiry project that he did with Northern Ireland. So this is a very standard inquiry learning project that some of our English teachers developed. He gives them credit at the bottom because he's a good social studies teacher and always cites his sources. So this is what an inquiry project would look like in any area in our department. So they take a look at a standard. If you take a look here, this is the standard that they would, this is a New Jersey State learning standard. So students would actually close read that, digest it, and come up with some questions that they may want to research. And then they go through an entire research process. And I sat in on Dr. Butler's presentation or his students' discussion a week and a half ago, and you cannot believe the level at which students discuss these events because they've done their research. They have a frame and a structure to work with, but what they use and what they research within that structure is totally of their own choice. So when a student has a choice within that structure, they are very passionate about what they're talking about, and it was amazing. I just sat and listened. They knew more. I mean, they know more about this topic than I think I could ever at this point. So this is just a traditional process for inquiry. They do a lot of reflection, and then at the end, they talk about, so what, why is this important? And that's where some of those conversations come into place. Identity work. I think you've probably seen some of this. So what we're doing right now with our students is we're finding that students are struggling to understand people in more than a one-dimensional way when they're reading a document or they are listening to a speech. So if you ask someone who Dr. Martin Luther King is, they're going to know him, but they're not going to know some of the issues that made him who he was. So this activity that I shared with you is actually from the progressive era. And what students were doing was they were looking at progressives. They were picking 4 areas that they wanted to look at in their life, maybe location, gender, citizenship, socioeconomic status, and they were applying those to those reformers, and then they were trying to figure out what their point of view might be. Now, not only were they doing that, but they were taking 3 progressive presidents, Taft, Roosevelt, and Wilson, and applying those same identity thoughts to those presidents. For example, what do we know about Taft? Does anyone know?
He's the biggest president ever.
Thank you. Okay. He was obese. His coffin was huge. So when you ask students, that's what they know. But what they don't know is when you do a little research, you realize that President Taft gained almost 100 pounds when he went into office because he was depressed and he ate. And so you put a human quality on someone, and it gives them a little bit more of an idea how to have empathy. So that's what we're working on with this type of document. So this is what they would look at. They would choose 4 aspects of an identity, and they would look at the reformer and say, okay, how would this affect my reformer? I'm just going to click on this because this is big. This is everything that we do, and I'm not going to go through a lot of this because it's crazy stuff. Critical thinking and historical thinking skills are listed here. Our department is in the process of creating almost a document that would attach with our curriculum that just says this is what we do. Here's the work that we do in civics. Here's the work that we do in inquiry. Here's our historical thinking skills. Here's our critical thinking skills. So when someone wants to go in and take a look at language for a rubric or work on a project, they have the language that we use as a department. So it's kind of like a who we are. All right, our mandates. There are a lot of them. So some of these are mandates, and some of these are actually woven into our curriculum. One of those would be climate change. Asian American Pacific Islander mandate is brand new. That one is still in the works. We have to have it in our curriculum, but very much like the Holocaust mandate, they are creating a commission. They will actually create curriculum and documents for our teachers to use, like they did with the Holocaust Commission. So that is the newest mandate there. But I'll start with the Holocaust mandate and just go through these very briefly for you. So obviously the Holocaust mandate, you know that we need to teach Holocaust and genocides, but also in addition to that, the Holocaust mandate also requires that we teach students that it's their personal responsibility to fight racism and hatred wherever they see it. Amistad is to celebrate the contributions of people of color in an appropriate place in the curriculum. That's everywhere in U.S. history because Black history is U.S. history. We talk about the building and development of America in the areas of industry, military, social institutions, art, culture, and every other aspect of life in America. LGBTQIA, and I hate when I don't like the disability. I like to say differently abled because disability just sounds negative. But anyway, LGBTQ and disability. So that's a mandate that we actually put into our curriculum last year, and that is political, economic, and social contributions of people with disabilities and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Climate change, Not really a mandate, but our updated standards have a very clear intention when it comes to climate change. Asian American, Pacific Islander mandate. Did you know that there were Filipinos here as early as the 1600s in Louisiana? I never learned that in social studies. So there's a lot of history that we're starting to bring into the curriculum. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have to highlight, and we plan on, and we do every day, highlight and promote diversity, economic diversity, equity, inclusion, tolerance, and belonging in connection with gender and sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, disabilities, and religious tolerance. We examine unconscious bias. That's part of our Hipaa practice. We encourage a safe and welcoming and inclusive environment for all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual and gender identities, mental, physical disabilities, and religious beliefs. So we have taken these mandates and we have wholeheartedly embraced them in our department, and they are everywhere in our curriculum. So here's an example of that. So we know that when we study the civil rights leaders or suffragettes, there are particular people that always come to the forefront. When you look at civil rights leaders, you hear about Rosa Parks, you hear about Martin Luther King, you hear about Malcolm X, all right, you hear about John Lewis. So after learning about all of the major leaders of this time period, our teachers have now broadened that. So instead of removing, we're adding. So for civil rights leaders, what we've done is, let me go back. Sorry. One of my teachers put this together for me. So here's the descriptions of the projects. So for the Civil Rights Project, which is the one I'm going to highlight very quickly, is what we did here is we tasked students with looking for civil rights leaders that are not as well known. Why are they not as well known? Was there something about them that wasn't appropriate for them to be the poster child of that time period? Were they a single parent? Were they gay? Were they not the right color for the time period? So I'll give you a quick example of that. Claudette Colvin, she's one of my favorites. Claudette Colvin actually refused to give up her seat on the bus before Rosa Parks. She was not a really good role model for the media because she was a single mom. So instead of this woman being the person that is written in history books, it's Rosa Parks because she was older. Claudette Colvin was a young single mom, and the media and the movement didn't feel that she would have been a good role model. So she was kind of forgotten. So we're teaching our students to kind of look beyond what they see in a history book. Okay. And this is the end of my presentation. So, and this is another addition, so we're adding. So we know Rosie the Riveter, right? But did you know that there were 600,000 Black Rosie the Riveters? And that wasn't mentioned in history books that often, if never when I was at that age. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure that all of our students see themselves in the curriculum. So when we talk about Rosie the Riveter, we talk about Caucasian Rosie the Riveter and any other Rosie the Riveter that might be out there. So students understand that it wasn't just this person that was decided to take that picture and to be on that propaganda poster. And I ended with this because I actually have a photo of some of our staff members as Rosie the Riveter.